All right, so today we start by talking about New Brunswick. They had some new cases recently. I mean, one of it I think was at a nursing home, but nonetheless, they have made masks mandatory outside. Again, this whole situation here with the whole virus thing is getting crazier and crazier by the day. We already know that the vast majority of people do not want this, right? Like, I mean, the Global News poll showed that more than twice as many people said no to the question than said yes. And again, that's probably a left-leaning audience, which is going to mean that if anything, they skew towards being more pro-mask to begin with. So again, um, the idea that we should be making masks mandatory, I think, is pretty insane because again, there's no evidence that shows that they work to begin with. We've had mandatory mask bylaws in Edmonton and Calgary and many cities in Alberta for 10 weeks now, a little longer in some of them. Has the cases gone down? No, they've gone up. I mean, Edmonton, they've gone up quite a bit. And have all the pro-mask zealots, have they admitted, yeah, we were wrong, we're not going to do this anymore? No, they just want to double down. Now they want it to be masks outside, masks in your house, masks while you're chewing, when you're eating. Like again, like the insanity knows no bounds. And this is exactly what I've been saying for a long time. um, the pro lockdown people and the mask zealots and all the lockdown zealots, they're not going to admit they're wrong. They're going to keep doubling down until people finally say no. And I'm worried, and I think most people should be worried that that's going to mean another lockdown, which is going to be terrible, right? I mean, some areas have already re-locked down. I mean, you have parts of Toronto that are pretty much closed. I mean, you got restaurants, gyms, all these kind of things are closed, and again, for no reason, like for no reason. The WHO came out against lockdowns, but yet is that changing people's minds? No. You know, this entire time, if you're on social media, you have to listen to what the WHO says, but now that they're against lockdowns, all of a sudden you don't have to listen to them anymore, right? Like, we have to listen to the experts, other than the ones that disagree with the lockdown and disagree with the mask wearing and all this kind of stuff, right? So again, it's just pure zealotry, if you ask me. And exactly what I've been warning. They're not going to admit they're wrong. It doesn't matter where we're at. They're not going to admit they're wrong. It doesn't matter how much evidence stacks up against mask wearing. They're not going to admit that it's wrong, right? The evidence never existed in the first place. So you actually expect them to do it now? Like again, this is the big problem with government, is that um, they have all the wrong incentives. Like and not to mention too these doctors and whatnot. Like they have all, and by these doctors I mean the ones that are up on TV and the ones that are running the provinces and the cities, not your run of the mill family doctor. But again, these people have all the wrong incentive because um, the problem being is that they have the incentive of, you get to go on TV all the time. You probably get an increase in salary. If you're someone who is the least bit egotistic, which I think most people are, some people very egotistic, but especially people in positions of power, I think that they would skew to being even more egotistic than the average person. And everybody has it to some extent. But again, that's the problem, is that on one hand, you can be like, yeah, we clearly overreacted to this. We're going to let people go about their daily lives with maybe some very minor restrictions. And then all of a sudden, the spotlight's no longer on you. Or we can um, pretend that this is still doomsday and get to go on TV every day and get to keep your bloated salary and your, like I say, like, of course, these people are going to do the wrong thing. So, and here's the other thing, too. Um, Whenever I'm taking advice, or what I would suggest other people do too as well, is that whenever you're going to take advice from anyone when it comes to these situations, and that is that if they don't have a personal stake in the game, then I wouldn't trust their advice. I don't care who they are, what side they're on. If people like the liberals, Doug Ford, Tam, any of these kind of people, if they don't stand to lose out both personally and financially if they make poor decisions, then I'm not going to trust any of their recommendations, because they're not. You can't make reasonable, coherent, um, suggestions and decisions if you don't have any downside for making the wrong decision. These people face little to no, I would argue, if anything, they stand to gain from making poor recommendations. And that is the big problem when it comes to these kind of things, is that, is Tam gonna lose her house, or is Tam gonna, get fired if she makes poor recommendations, which she has this entire time? No, no, not at all. Not at all. Is Doug Ford going to get voted? I mean, I think he's going to get voted out because he wasn't overly popular to begin with, and I think that um, he for whatever reason he's deciding to do something that's going to alienate his base, right? Like, the conservative type people are not the type of people that are going to be big on lockdowns, because the leftists think that any problem in society, you can just throw money at it, right? Like, if people are unemployed, just pay them not to work, you know. And not to mention too, they usually trend towards the more authoritarian side. Um, but again, conservatives aren't like that. Conservatives are more individualistic. They're more big on personal responsibility. Locking everybody down isn't personal responsibility. That's the exact opposite of personal responsibility. So Doug Ford's kind of the exception to the rule. But again, Doug Ford's did a terrible job this whole time. I really hope he gets voted out, because I mean, that probably means the Liberals take power and destroy things even more. But I mean, given how bad of a job he's done, he deserves it. I mean, in Alberta, I mean, Kenny came out this morning and is talking more about not locking down, about being bigger on personal responsibility. And I have to give credit where credit is due on that. That is what we should be saying right now. He should be pushing back more against the whole mask stuff, but I do kind of understand his perspective, and I think people need to understand his perspective as well. Is that if he comes out too much against the lockdowns and all this kind of stuff, which that would be the right thing to do because the evidence clearly points to that, it would hurt him politically. Because again, politics isn't about reality. Politics isn't about objective truth or reality. It should be, but it isn't. The majority of people vote, and their politics are based off emotion, especially on the left, but to the right as well. So again, it's classic perception over reality. It doesn't matter what the death rate is on this. The death rate is clearly already below 0.1%. It doesn't matter how low. The death rate could literally be 1 in a million, but it doesn't matter, because most people, I don't know if it's most, but a very high percent of the population believes that this is this serious threat still, and that would hurt people. But again, if you go too far the other way as well, you're going to lose support as well. So the clear strategy when it comes to this is just to blindly play that middle ground, right? And that's what Jason Kenney's doing. Um, and I think it's good in some ways, but he should be a little more against this kind of stuff. But again, it's very tough. This is from Paul Joseph Watson. He links to a Spectator Index tweet saying, just in, the World Bank estimates 115 million people will be pushed into extreme poverty by the end of 2020 due to the pandemic. And he says, a reminder that extreme poverty causes starvation and death. And I would also add malnutrition. That's also very bad for people, especially in poor countries. That's a massive issue. But nonetheless, when will our governments factor this into their lockdown policies? Now, again, this is the big problem, that these numbers aren't measured. When people say, oh, we have whatever, 10,000 Canadians have died, 200,000 Americans, they don't factor this kind of stuff in too. I mean, the UN has already said that 10,000 people in the third world are dying just because of lockdown measures causing starvation and malnutrition. And again, that's not including the amount of people that are going to die later in life, earlier than they otherwise would have if they wouldn't have been struggling because of this kind of stuff. So again, I mean, we literally have a handful of people dying every day in Canada. Like, are those lives really worth more than the lives of people dying in Africa and other third world countries? Like, I don't believe so. I don't believe so. I don't believe it's fair that, especially considering the average age of, I mean, in Alberta, it's 82, I think. Like, the average person dying is already at or past, in some cases, the median age of dying already anyway. So again, the idea that we should be completely destroying society just to add maybe a year or two tops onto people's lives is absolute insanity. Like it's absolute insanity. And if I mean, here's the thing. I think a lot of old people are starting to realize that they're finally starting to be awoken to the negative ramification that's been done to the next generations. And I see more and more old people being like, "Hey, I'd like to be able to be more safe, but I don't think that it's fair that I destroy the next generation and the generation after that's livelihoods to add a couple years to my life." I mean, to me, it's incredibly selfish or at this point to be an old person and wanting to have lockdowns. Like incredibly selfish, like infinite amount of times more selfish than not wanting or going out in public without a mask. Like again, so again, this is stuff that should be talked about more. You definitely need to be telling people about this kind of stuff. The next thing is from Daniel Hanan here. He says, I mean, he links to a graph of deaths per million. Again, so this is per capita from August 6th to October 6th. And then again, you have, I mean, let's pull it up here. You have Sweden, the black line. Again, Sweden was slightly higher than these other countries. Now, again, these are compared to maybe the next Germany is probably bigger, but I mean, Spain, France, and the UK are all major countries in Europe. And if you look at the deaths per million, Sweden's at a flat line, right? Like Sweden's at a flat line. But you look at all these other countries, I mean, Spain's gone through the roof. France is very high, and UK is relatively high as well. So again, you have all these idiots talking about how Sweden, their policy didn't work, but it clearly did. Like all the evidence points toward that, and it's been pointing towards that for months, like literally since you know maybe even May, but if not June, July. Like their policy's clearly been the one to go with. The last thing to talk about here is from Maxime Bernier, and he links to a National Post story saying CBC to lay off dozens of journalists and management across multiple divisions. And he says not even 1.2 billion in government funding gets every year could save CBC from their abysmal ratings. Their other revenues are still going down, and they have to lay off competent staff dedicated to producing objective news. So sad, sniff, sniff. No, again, CBC should be defunded. They absolutely should be defunded. Um, and if they want to spew their propaganda based off money they're actually earning through their own hard work, go ahead, be my guest. But this idea that taxpayer money should be going to this kind of stuff is absolutely insane. Now, the left will defend it, but the main reason they defend it is because they're so biased. Like again, like, and here's the reason that you know that they're biased when it comes to this is that if taxpayer money is going to go to media outlets, then where's the taxpayer money going to conservative outlets? Like seriously, where is it? And again, they'll argue that their counterpoint to that will be, oh well, the majority of Canadians are left leaning. Okay, well, that may be true, that may not be true. So on one hand, okay, well, can we go in Alberta and Saskatchewan and give taxpayer money to the Rebel or someone like that? Because the majority of Albertans and Saskatchewans are right leaning, so that should be fine, right? Now, again, that's one point that contradicts that worldview. And the second point that contradicts that worldview would be the fact that, okay, it may only be 55 or 60%. So in that case, we should be giving 40 to 45% of available money to conservative outlets, right? Like that would only make sense. So again, it's just blatant hypocrisy on their parts. And again, like I say, CBC absolutely should be defunded. They're an absolute joke of a news outlet, and it really boggles my mind that people still watch them and take them seriously. Like really, people still watch them and actually think that they're objective, especially younger people. Like older people, maybe because when they were younger, the news actually was somewhat credible. But if you're under 50 and you watch CBC or CTV or Global and actually think that they're objective, like seriously, like I got some oceanfront property to sell you in Alberta, right? Like this is how gullible these people are. So anyway, I'm gonna leave a video there. If you'd like to, make sure you hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you follow me on Twitter especially, but also BitChute and Parler. All those links are in the description, so you can find them all there.